Good evening. Welcome to South Asia Newsline. I'm Lipakshi Khurana. Here are the top stories we're tracking for you on Tuesday, the 22nd of March. New Delhi ranks as world's most polluted capital for fourth consecutive year. Muslim countries responsible for Islamophobia after 9/11, says Pakistan Prime Minister at OIC summit. And death toll climbs to at least 10 in ferry accident in Bangladesh. And now for all the details. Indian capital New Delhi was found to be the most polluted capital city in the world for the fourth consecutive year in 2021, according to a recently released World Air Quality Report. The study states 6 of the world's most polluted cities are in India, underscoring the need for tougher measures to combat toxic air.
India's capital, New Delhi, was the world's most polluted capital for the fourth straight year in 2021, according to a recent report by Swiss group IQA, underscoring the need for tougher measures to combat toxic air that causes severe respiratory diseases. According to the report, New Delhi saw a 14.6% increase in poisonous PM2.5 concentrations in 2021, with the pollutant levels rising to 96.4 micrograms per cubic meter for 84 micrograms in 2020. The study showed air pollution caused an estimated 54,000 premature deaths in Delhi in 2020, showing a higher toll than any other big global city. It also states 6 of the world's most polluted cities were in India. New Delhi residents expressed that they were affected by vehicular pollution.
लोगों के पास अभी हर एक के घर में 2 व्हीलर या 4 व्हीलर आ गई है, तो हर जन अभी पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट इस्तेमाल नहीं कर रहे हैं, तो खुद की गाड़ी से ही जाना पसंद करते हैं। इसके लिए हर एक की गाड़ी अभी रास्ते पे है, तो इसके वजह से ट्रैफिक बढ़ गया है और ट्रैफिक बढ़ने के कारण हर एक गाड़ी पोल्यूशन छोड़ रही है।
Every winter, when the air in Delhi turns toxic due to stubble burning in neighbouring agrarian states of Punjab and Haryana, the city authorities are forced to shut down schools and more children end up at hospitals with breathing difficulties. A Lancet study for 2019 showed 1.67 million people had died due to air pollution in India.
And in the first hike in over 4 months, the fuel prices have been raised in India. Petrol and diesel prices were raised by over 80 paise a litre on Tuesday, while domestic cooking gas prices were increased by ₹50 per cylinder. Despite volatility in the international crude oil market, the government took a series of duty cuts to keep the fuel rates unaffected. Since the last hike in November, crude oil prices have shot up over 25%.
Petrol and diesel prices in India were hiked by 80 paise a litre each, while domestic cooking gas prices were increased by ₹50 per cylinder on Tuesday. While petrol and diesel prices had been on a freeze since November 4, ahead of the assembly elections in states like Uttar Pradesh and Punjab, the LPG rates were last revised on October 6. The latest price increase means consumers will pay less than 1% more at the pump, despite a substantial increase in global oil prices since the conflict in Ukraine began last month and a falling Indian rupee. Petrol price in Indian capital has gone up from ₹95.41 to ₹96.21 per litre, while diesel will now cost ₹87.47 a litre as against ₹86.67 per litre. A 14.2 kg non-subsidized LPG cylinder will now cost ₹949.50. Commuters in Delhi shared their ordeal, saying the price hike will affect their monthly budget and expenses.
प्राइस ऊपर बढ़ते जा रहे हैं सर, इसके लिए मिडिल क्लास के बारे में भी कुछ सोचना चाहिए गवर्नमेंट को। हम लोग इससे बहुत प्रभावित होते हैं जैसे ही पेट्रोल के रेट बढ़ते हैं सर, तो हम गवर्नमेंट से यही रिक्वेस्ट करेंगे कि प्लीज़ कृपा करके जो है पेट्रोल पे थोड़ी सी लगाम लगाई जाए, ताकि मिडिल क्लास वालों को भी थोड़ा सा जीवन मिले।
Opposition parties also protested in the parliament against the increase in prices of petrol, diesel and LPG cylinders. While the protesters staged a walkout demanding a rollback in the lower house, the upper house was adjourned amid the chaos. India, the world's third biggest oil importer and consumer, ships in about 85% of its oil needs from overseas market. Its local diesel and petrol prices are linked to international prices of the two fuels. which directionally follow increases in the crude oil prices.
And US President Joe Biden has singled out India among the Quad group of countries for being somewhat shaky in acting against Russia, its biggest supplier of military hardware. India has urged an end to the violence in Ukraine but has abstained from voting for sanctions against its old Cold War ally.
US President Joe Biden on Monday said only India among the Quad group of countries was somewhat shaky in acting against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, as India tries to balance its ties with Russia and the West. India is the only Quad member not to have condemned the invasion. It has urged an end to the violence in Ukraine but has abstained from voting against Russia, its Cold War ally and the biggest supplier of military hardware. India's foreign ministry, after a virtual summit between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison on Monday, said that Australia, a Quad member, understood India's position on Ukraine, which reflected our own situation, our own considerations.
In response to his aggression, we presented a united front throughout NATO and in the Pacific. The Quad is, with the possible exception of India being somewhat shaky on some of this, but Japan has been extremely strong, so has Australia, in terms of dealing with Putin's aggression.
Biden's remarks came as the U.S. Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland and Indian Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla met in New Delhi on Monday, with talks focusing on 2+2 ministerial dialogues and also the Ukraine crisis. Even though India has grown close to the United States in recent years, it still depends on Russia for a continuous supply of arms and ammunition amid a Himalayan border standoff with China and perennial tension with Pakistan.
News from Pakistan. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan on Tuesday said Islamophobia grew after the 9/11 terror attacks and went on unchecked because the Muslim countries did nothing to check the wrong narrative that Islam was equated with terrorism. He made the remarks while addressing the inaugural session of a conference of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation in Islamabad.
The 48th session of Council of Foreign Ministers of OIC, the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, began in Pakistan's capital Islamabad on Tuesday, with more than 600 delegates attending, including Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi invited as a special guest. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan in his keynote address said Islamophobia grew after the 9/11 terror attacks and went on unchecked because the Muslim countries did nothing to check the wrong narrative that Islam was equated with terrorism. But the world is realizing it is a reality, he said, as he lauded the recent resolution by UN General Assembly against Islamophobia. Speaking about the Afghan humanitarian crisis post-Taliban takeover, PM Khan said that it is extremely important that OIC nations together stabilize Afghanistan with aid for the country among the summit's ambitious agenda. Khan also suggested member countries should discuss how to mediate and bring about a ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The two-day OIC conference comes amid political turmoil in Pakistan, with the parliament to hold a session on Friday over no-confidence motion filed by the opposition against PM Khan, blaming him for mismanaging the economy and rising inflation.
And moving on, locals and political activists have raised concern over rising inflation, lawlessness and corruption in Gilgit-Baltistan that has continued to afflict the common public in the illegally occupied region. Over the past few months, residents have held several protests against black marketing and stalled development projects, but their voices remain unheard.
Locals and political activists in Gilgit-Baltistan have expressed anger over rising inflation, lawlessness and corruption in the illegally occupied region that continues to haunt them. Over the past few months, residents have held massive protests against black marketing and shortage of food supply, but their voices remain unheard. Apart from lack of basic facilities, political activists claim lawlessness and corruption by the government officials have added more burden to woes of people, while the Pakistan government repeatedly turns a blind eye to their problems, making Gilgit-Baltistan one of the most backward regions.
यहाँ इस वक्त आवाम मसाइल के दिल में फंस चुके हैं बुरी तरह, ठीक है कि नहीं, महंगाई की शक्ल में, लाकानूनियत की शक्ल में। जहाँ जाओ दफातर वीरान हो चुके हैं, बैठ चुके हैं, वहाँ साइलिन के काम हल नहीं होते हैं, करप्शन बढ़ गई है, अकरा परवरी बढ़ गई है, और इस तरह के बहुत सारे मसाइल हैं जो आवाम को इस वक्त फेस कर रहे हैं। तो इंशाअल्लाह अज़ीज़ पाकिस्तान मुस्लिम लीग नून, PDM और पीपल्स पार्टी ने जो इक़दाम उठाए हैं, इंशाअल्लाह अज़ीज़ जमहूरियत बहाल होने के बाद ये तमाम मसाइल हल होंगे।
Pakistan had promised of jobs, education and prosperity in Gilgit-Baltistan as part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. However, locals claim the policies framed by Islamabad only aim to alter the demography and systematically secure the ownership of the lands possessed by locals.
And moving on to news from Bangladesh, the death toll in a ferry capsize incident in Narayanganj district in central Bangladesh climbed to at least 10 after 2 more bodies were recovered on Tuesday. Dozens had went missing after the small ferry known as Launch, packed with passengers, collided with a cargo vessel and sank on Sunday on the Shitalaksha River, the latest waterway tragedy to hit the nation. Nearly 20 passengers had reportedly jumped off the ferry and some managed to swim ashore or were rescued by nearby boats. The Bangladesh Inland Water Transport Authority has filed a murder case against 8 cargo officials in connection with the incident, local media reports said. Hundreds of people die each year in ferry accidents in Bangladesh, a low-lying South Asian country that has extensive inland waterways but lacks safety standards. And the third edition of Connect India-Nepal International Entrepreneurship Conclave, aimed at bringing entrepreneurs of both the countries together, is set to be held in capital Kathmandu on March 23rd. As per the organizers, the event will celebrate stories about passion, hard work and commitment to fight the odds, especially during the start of any entrepreneur journey. The conclave is co-organized by Clock Business Innovations and Embassy of India in Kathmandu. In the 3 phases of the process, 20 startups were mentored and trained by personalities from the entrepreneurial ecosystem for 9 days. 4 from 20 were selected for the finale, which will be held on Wednesday.
Which our Prime Minister had said a few years ago while highlighting India's policy towards startups and innovation. He said that we may have 1 million problems in our country, but we also have 1 billion minds to solve them. And that's, I think, the very spirit behind our support for startups in our government policy and in our industrial policy as well.
And India's northern Jammu and Kashmir territory is all set to launch a charm offensive on visitors in the upcoming tourist season as preparations have reached the final stages for opening the Tulip Garden, the largest such garden in Asia.
Asia's largest tulip garden in India's Jammu and Kashmir territory is visited by thousands of tourists every year. The tulip garden, situated on the foothills of Zabarwan range with an overview of the famous Dal Lake, is expected to be thrown open for tourists and locals in coming days. With the tourism season in the valley set to begin in April, preparations for opening the garden for public and for the Tulip Festival have reached the final stages. The entire workforce in the garden, including gardeners, masons, painters and electricians, are working to make the garden ready. Gardeners are doing different jobs under the supervision of officials of the floriculture department.
गार्डनर्स, हमारे ऑफिसर्स यहाँ पर तकरीबन 8-9 महीने इस गार्डन को बनाने के लिए काम करते रहते हैं, दिन रात, बर्फ़ में, बारिश में, और इस गार्डन को बनाने के लिए। और इस गार्डन को जब देखने के लिए आते हैं, इस कश्मीर वादी में एशिया का जो सबसे बड़ा गार्डन माना जाता है।
हमें उम्मीद है इस साल अच्छी तरीके से हमारा गार्डन ठीक चलेगा। तो और साथ ही साथ जो मेहमान यहाँ आएंगे वो भी खुश रहेंगे, क्योंकि इन्होंने काम भी अच्छा किया है कि और फूल भी अच्छी तरीके से आए हैं।
The flowers are expected to bloom fully in few days. Apart from tulips, many other species of flowers have also been added. Locals in the region heavily depends on tourism for livelihood, and Tulip Garden has played a vital role in boosting the sector. Tulip Festival attracts tourists before the summer season from all over the world and also helps open more employment avenues for the locals.
Well, that's all we have for you from South Asia this evening. Now, our viewers can watch the show on SouthAsiaNewsline.com. You can also visit us on Facebook.com/SAsiaNewsline and follow us on Twitter @SAsiaNewsline. That's all in tonight's edition. We'll see you same time tomorrow. Good night.